Okay, to unravel a 400-year-old literary mystery today, we actually need to start our journey in the year 2000. We're going to look at the Egyptian film Ard el Khouf, or Land of Fear, starring the legendary Ahmed Zaki. Now, I know, it sounds like a completely unexpected starting point for this explainer, but what I found so fascinating is that this modern cinematic masterpiece is practically the perfect key to unlocking one of the absolute greatest literary enigmas in human history.
So, picture this. In Land of Fear, Zaki plays Officer Yahya, right? He's a cop who goes super deep undercover into the criminal underworld. The mission is supposed to be incredibly simple: infiltrate, record, report. But as time passes, Yahya just completely loses his grip on reality. The line between being a righteous officer and a ruthless criminal completely dissolves. He starts having these intense existential crises, and he literally no longer knows if he's just playing a role or if the mask has actually become his true face. And what's truly wild is the sheer chaos of how critics interpreted this film. I mean, some said it's a political allegory for a lost generation in Egypt. Others argued that Yahya represents Nietzsche's Übermensch, finding his own meaning totally outside of societal rules. And then some people just thought it was a brilliant, straightforward action film. So, who actually understood the movie correctly?
Well, the answer is all of them. And that's because Yahya is fundamentally what we call a quixotic character. He left reality, he entered a world entirely of his own making, and he became completely consumed by an illusion that he genuinely believed was a sacred mission. To really understand Yahya, and honestly, to understand this universal, enduring struggle between our own grand ideals and a crushing reality, we have to look back at a Spanish novel written over 4 centuries ago.
Section 1. Who is Don Quixote? Right at the start of the story, our protagonist isn't even a knight at all. He's just Alonso Quijano. He's a 50-year-old farmer living a completely unremarkable life in rural Spain. But he reads so many tales of chivalry that his brain essentially takes an indefinite vacation from reality. He just decides that the age of heroes isn't over, and that he himself is a knight. Now, before we laugh at him, we really have to understand the monumental cultural stakes here. The legendary Fyodor Dostoevsky actually called this the most profound literary work in the entire world. Just think about the weight of that statement. Milan Kundera even argued that the exact moment Don Quixote stepped out of his house, the modern novel was born. So this isn't just some funny old story, it's quite literally a foundational text of human thought.
And the core dynamic of the book is brilliant. It's this absolute absurd contrast between his grand illusions and his completely pathetic reality. Quijano renames himself Don Quixote. He digs up his grandfather's rusted old armor and literally makes a helmet out of cardboard. He takes his weak, terribly emaciated horse and gives it this majestic name, Rocinante. And because, every knight needs a noble princess, he just picks a naive peasant girl and names her Dulcinea. And then there's the famous scene. When he sees a field of windmills, his mind completely transforms them into ferocious giants that he absolutely must slay for the glory of God.
Section 2. A comedy hiding deep tragedy. To really grasp this hidden tragedy, I'm talking about the violent clash between Quixote's eloquent, grandiose language and the frankly pathetic physical beatings he receives. Let's contrast it for a second with pure tragedy. Take the character Galal from Naguib Mahfouz's epic Al-Harafish. Galal becomes totally obsessed with achieving immortality to avoid the tragic pain of death. He builds this massive, completely pointless minaret, only to die a humiliating, crushing death face down in a trough of animal feed. Mahfouz presents that gap between the ideal and reality as just devastating, heartbreaking tragedy. Cervantes, on the other hand, gives Don Quixote a very similar gap, but he softens the pain. He filters it through this absurd, slapstick, highly comedic lens. So the crucial point here is exactly how the novel uses violence. The philosopher Slavoj Žižek actually refers to this as fantasy violence. Think about when Quixote charges at a windmill and gets literally launched into the air. That works on 3 different levels. First, it completely snaps us, the reader, back to reality, reminding us, hey, he's really just a crazy old man. But second, because he just dusts himself off and keeps going, kind of like Tom and Jerry cartoon violence with absolutely no lasting physical consequences, it actually deepens the illusion. And third, it relentlessly blurs the line between truth and fiction for us as the audience. Section 3. The line between madness and reason. This constant blurring of reality brings up such a fascinating question. Is Don Quixote actually a madman, or is he a visionary? The author Vladimir Nabokov suggested something completely brilliant here. He said Quixote is indeed a madman, but he is a madman standing right on the absolute edge of rationality. Nabokov compared him to Galileo standing before the church inquisitors. Galileo saw a truth about the universe that literally everyone else denied. To the authorities,
Galileo was mad. So, sometimes standing firmly by an unseen truth looks exactly like insanity to the rest of the world.
It's wild how history's greatest thinkers have projected their own personal philosophies right onto him. Sigmund Freud, entirely unsurprisingly, diagnosed Quixote with classic narcissism. He saw him as a man totally disconnected from the world, just using fantasy as a defense mechanism against the super disappointing reality. But Friedrich Nietzsche? He saw something completely different. He saw a Christ-like figure, a man sacrificing himself for his ideals, almost like an early version of the Übermensch, forging his own reality. And then you have existentialists, like Miguel de Unamuno, who viewed Quixote as the ultimate knight of faith, representing supreme freedom and individuality against a totally conforming world.
And we can clearly see this dynamic playing out even today. Just consider the Oscar-winning film Birdman. The protagonist is this aging, forgotten actor. And what does he do? He creates a parallel superhero reality where he can literally fly and move objects with his mind. Just like Don Quixote, he conjures up this massive illusion to escape an unbearable reality where the world has simply moved on without him. And we, as the audience, are just left trapped right there in his hallucinations, totally unsure of what is actually real.
Section 4. Frustrations of Cervantes and Spain. To really grasp why this masterpiece of escapism was even created, we have to trace Cervantes' own heartbreaking personal journey. It reveals so much. He was a genuinely heroic soldier who fought the Ottomans at the epic naval battle of Lepanto. He was captured and spent 5 agonizing years as a prisoner of war in Algiers. But the real tragedy, when he finally returned home, totally ready for a hero's welcome, he found an impoverished, incredibly corrupt Spanish empire. The wealth coming in from the Americas was enriching just a select few, while soldiers and everyday citizens literally starved. He was neglected, he was broke, and he was deeply disillusioned. So he wrote Don Quixote as a silent, brilliant protest against this new, completely unrecognizable world.
Because, speaking out directly in 17th century Spain was essentially a death sentence. So Cervantes used this incredibly clever framing device. He claimed he didn't even write the book at all, but merely translated it from a manuscript by a completely fictional Muslim, or Morisco, author named Sidi Hamid Benengeli. This layered irony was genius. It allowed him to completely bypass the deadly Spanish Inquisition while subtly protesting the violent expulsion of Muslims from Spain, and he got to mock a society that had completely abandoned old ideals like chivalry and honor, replacing them with pure greed and corruption.
Section 5. Defeat by Reality and Mirrors.
As we move into the rather somber conclusion of the novel, let's just quickly compare the structure of this tragedy with others. In classic tragedy, the main conflict is man versus fate or authority. Hamlet is destroyed fighting the corrupt authority of his uncle. Oedipus is destroyed fighting the inescapable fate decreed by the gods. But Quixotic tragedy? It's entirely different. Don Quixote isn't destroyed by a king or a god. His inevitable, heartbreaking defeat comes from fighting the sheer, uncompromising absurdity of reality itself.
And this brings us to the most haunting climax of the novel. Quixote isn't killed by the giants he imagined, or the bandits he fought. He is broken by a mirror. Another character, who's disguised as the Knight of the White Moon, challenges Quixote and actually defeats him. And the condition of his defeat? Quixote must return home and stop his quests. This quote-unquote real knight forces Quixote to look in a mirror and finally see his true, pathetic, aging self. The illusion completely shatters. Quixote goes home, his sanity finally returns, and the exact moment he accepts reality, he simply lies down and dies. The illusion was literally the only thing keeping him alive. All of this leaves us with the incredibly complex legacy of the word Quixotic, which survives in our vocabulary even today. It perfectly encapsulates this dual nature. On one hand, media outlets frequently use it as an insult to critique political figures striving against seemingly insurmountable odds, whether they're describing Mussolini's attempts to revive the Roman Empire or Donald Trump's fight against wind energy. Yet, at the exact same time, it is used as the absolute highest praise for breathtaking courage. Think of the solitary, nameless man standing bravely in front of a line of tanks in Tiananmen Square. That right there is the purest embodiment of the Quixotic spirit.
To really anchor the emotional weight of what we've been unpacking, listen to these poignant lines from the Syrian poet Mamdouh Adwan. He captures this enduring nobility just beautifully. He wrote, "We are the knights. It is enough for us that we do not remain silent when a human is insulted." I mean, it perfectly distills the idea that even if our armor is rusted and our horses are weak, just the pursuit of justice and the sheer refusal to accept a broken reality is a victory in itself.
And that brings us to our final thought.
We've explored the madness, the comedy, the deep philosophy, and the total heartbreak behind this 400-year-old masterpiece. So I want to leave you with this final provocative question. If the ultimate cost of sanity is forcing yourself to accept a broken, unjust reality, isn't there a bit of Don Quixote in all of us? Keep striving for your ideals. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.